about this particular car because it got so much better once they made that adjustment on the right front. The sanctioning body, who shall remain nameless, came to them and said, hey, look, can't use that anymore. It's too much of an advantage. So they re-scripted with their language what they can do on the right front. That same driver then turns around, goes back to the shop, does a couple things that basically did the exact same thing the old setup did, but it cost him 5 times as much. When the old setup only cost him $20. Honestly, it was $20 worth of changes. Now it costs him $100 to do the same thing in a different way to get the same result. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look at what Jonathan Davenport did. And with, what's his name? Rumley?
Mm-hmm.
Look at that. They were doing something trick on that left rear corner. I don't know what exactly it was, but they were doing something tricky with it. And guess what? Now there's a rule against it.
Right. Now they've got to find another way to do the same thing, which they will.
And
they will.
And when that rule came out, you know what Rumley said? That's cool. I'll find another way to do the same thing.
And that's what they do. And to find that other way costs 4 to 5 times as much as what they were doing before.
And look at what IMCA's doing right now with the rules in regards to weight being bolted on to
the axle tubes. Yep.
With unsprung weight on the rear end. Let's just go with the broad term because they've gone everything saying you can't bolt a chunk of lead to the axle or to the rear end.
Right.
You can't have a 20-pound wheel spacer. It can only be this big and made out of this much and all this. So guys are going to go out there and find a different way to do it. I mean,
right.
I'm not dumb.
And that's the thing.
You find a crew chief out there who can't figure out how to make something like that happen, or a former crew chief.
They're not going to be former will be what they are.
No, they're going to go out there and do it.
Well, I know, but if they can't find a way to get that done, especially on the top team, they'll be a former crew chief.
They're bye-bye.
Right.
They're done. I mean, look at I mean, and I know you hate this analogy, but look at guys like Chad Knaus.
Mm-hmm.
Look at guys like Slugger.
Mm-hmm.
How many times have those guys been suspended from NASCAR because of an unapproved thing?
Which I think, no, you're right. They're creative. They're thinking. They're how can I make this car better? Because it's unapproved, they get suspended. I think I'm one of those guys, and I'm old school. If I'm looking at a car and I read a set of rules and it doesn't say that I can,
exactly.
I think that is an open area where.
But then
say
again,
I can do that.
You go a step farther.
But you're talking about a sanctioning body like NASCAR where everything's got to be pre-approved. You got to get approval to sneeze over there.
But that's the same way IMCA is.
Right.
I mean, look at GRT, for instance, came out with a GM metric brake caliper for the rear that changed instead of, okay, I got to remember how they did this. They flip-flopped the bleeder and the port, the pressure port on the brake caliper. Mm-hmm. Flip-flop, instead of putting the bleeder into the bleeder port, they put it in the pressure port and reamed out and tapped out the hole and put the pressure line into the bleeder port.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, guess what? IMCA flipped out about that and said, we want samples before we'll approve it. Because it wasn't, quote-unquote, a stock part. They ended up approving it.
It's...
over a brake caliper.
Right.
What kind of an advantage is changing the ports on a brake caliper going to give you? Granted, there are a couple, but seriously?
Is it so much where it's going to automatically put your car in victory lane? Absolutely not. Not going to happen.
Nope.
No.
Not with what that change did to that piece of equipment. It wasn't a performance gaining advantage.
Right.
In a lot of sense. There was a little bit performance gain from it, but not much.
Not so much that it just write the W's in now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I get where you're going with it. Here's my take. Here's my take on what's going on with dirt track racing and why it is getting so expensive. Okay? We can talk the cost of engines. You can talk that all day long. We've talked about that on the show prior. You can talk about the cost of the cars themselves. Yes, the cost of the cars have gone up. Right now, I was talking to a chassis manufacturer today.
Mm-hmm.
We called them up. We said, hey, look, doing a little research for our show. This is what we want to know. If a guy comes to you and says, we want this car, doesn't have to have the best of everything, just the average package you're going to sell to the average customer. Race ready, no seat, no motor, no tranny. Just roller, everything, but I bolt my motor and tranny in and put my seat in and go racing. What are we looking at? $35,000.
Late model?
Late model. This is a late model, yes. Good. Thanks for saying that. Late model, $35,000.
With double adjustables on it, shocks?
Yep. Average, not the best of everything, just the average stuff.
$35,000.
$35,000.
That's not bad.
But, now listen. He named off 3 other chassis manufacturers, who I'm not going to say, but you call them and you get a price on the same package. And you're going to look at $45,000. And this is why. And it was a very valid point, and it makes sense. After doing our research, and we've talked about a little bit prior this in 2017, after doing the research today, the biggest cost, the biggest reason racing is getting so expensive is because you've got those national teams like Bloomquist, like Davenport, like
Bobby Pierce,
GRT, Bobby Pierce, the
Herbs,
Rockets,
the Moyers.
Yeah, all these major chassis manufacturers that have hired Longhorn, perfect example. They hit the scene and they were just BA fast. Why? They had an engineer there. These engineers that these guys are hiring are using practices that you see at the cup level.
Almost like we were talking about.
We're not just building race cars. Now we're putting them on pull-down rigs.
It's like
now we're testing everything.
Like what we talked about with lethal chassis earlier.
Right.
You didn't realize that.
I didn't realize that, how they did it over there, no. But talking with a lot of these guys, hiring this in-house engineer, using the pull-down rigs, using all that stuff that they're using to develop these cars, wind tunnels.
Yeah.
For dirt late models. That is what's costing
we talked with
the teams that are buying these cars so much, because now you've got guys buying cars.
Well, that's, you look at it. Look at the valences and the noses, the MD3s. That's not just to look good.
No, there's a reason why they're mounted the way they are.
There's some engineering behind it.
Yeah, no kidding.
I've talked with guys and they're like, gosh, it's what's an MD3 nose cost these days? Like $200 or something like that. What they're like, they're freaking out about the cost. It's like, time out. Do you realize what goes into that? And after talking with one of our drivers, after he explained some things that he's learned over the last, since February, when he talked to a couple guys, there's a lot going into these cars. A lot.
Well, and again, and you're going to hear us later on from the people we talked to on the call-in, it's not the cost of the cars themselves. The equipment that's going on to them isn't much more than it was a few years ago. It's the technology. It's the engineers that are helping design these cars that's driving the cost up when you go to buy that stuff.
Exactly.
It's not the cost of the car itself. You can go buy that car without the engineer. If that engineer wasn't there in-house, it's going to cost you a lot more. That, I think, is the biggest driving factor of the rise of late model racing, modified racing. You're straining those guys.
Purpose-built race cars.
Right. But that all trickles down to all different divisions.
Absolutely. You look at, where do most of our chassis come from that are in the sportsman and super sport division?
They're all former late models.
They're all former late models.
Every one of them.
They're former modifieds running 3-link. About the only car that's not benefiting from that type of engineering are your street stocks, are your non-purpose built race cars.
So in the last 2 years, when you're talking about late models across the board, and I'm talking, it doesn't matter, you take the major manufacturers, put them in a pool, in a group, average it out. Over the last 2 years, you're looking at a rise in the cost of just the cars themselves, 3 to 5%.
Which isn't bad. It's
about typical when you lease something say you're in a mall. Your yearly lease is going to go up 3 to 5%.
That's not bad.
Business.
It's inflation.
It is. Now, here's something. Late models. Talking late models, a few years ago, let's say 10 years ago, $12,000 late model. like we talked about earlier, is now $30,000. This, you go back a decade.
Yep.
Okay. But again, 10 years ago, guys weren't using in-house engineers. Guys weren't using pull-down rigs. Guys weren't using all this fancy equipment that cost that company more to produce these cars. Of course, if I go out and buy this pull-down rig, do you think I'm going to sell the cars going to cost the same as it did before I bought that $30,000 piece of instrument?
No.
I mean, that's going to go into the cost of the car you're buying. Before all that stuff hit the scene, because of the teams like Longhorn and a Rocket and Black Diamond and Bloomquist and all these, major manufacturers started using this stuff. That's when you started seeing the cars really skyrocket in price. Now, it's not going up so much because that technology is there. Everybody's kind of got it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So now everybody's kind of on a level playing field again, but their cost of the cars skyrocketed. We've talked to several people today, and this is the one. Our call-in one. Conversation we're going to have tonight is going to be eye-opening because we're going to talk about local level late models, national level late models, modifieds, national level cost of racing, period. Doesn't matter what kind of car you're in. I can't wait to get to that portion of the show.
I can't either.
Because it changed my perspective on a lot of things. But the thing about it is, racing, number one, is not a cheap sport. You know that going in. I don't care if you're racing go-karts. I don't care if you're racing RC cars. I don't care if you're racing modifieds, late models, or World of Outlaw 410 sprint cars. Dirt track racing.
Racing in general.
Right. But we're kind of sticking to the dirt track world. We've seen the cost just blow up. Now it's kind of hanging around, the 3 to 5%. But it is so expensive overall. The average guy can't go out. Like 10 years ago, if you wanted to go build a late model and be competitive, you could do it for $20,000. Not anymore. Not anymore. What do you think?
No. I mean,
we're seeing modified rollers that are hitting $30,000.
Who are you talking to?
Well, and we talked to a guy that bought one not long ago, and you've already mentioned that chassis manufacturer.
Mm-hmm.
That's expensive for a class that's designed to be cost-effective according to the rule book that people... You see what I'm saying?
Now you're opening up a can of worms because I'm about ready to lose it.
This is what we're talking about.
Okay. So you start talking modifieds. You start talking what's dominant in the modifieds right now. It's a 604 crate. Okay. In our neck of the woods, the 604 crate with an IMCA mod is the ticket in the Pacific Northwest, on the West Coast. Mm-hmm. When you start talking IMCA racing, okay. So you're limited to having the same horsepower as the next guy, right?
Right.
With that, you're within a certain range. Okay. Racers want to go fast. They want to have the best of the best. So you're going to, you start talking about you're having an affordable series, an affordable class being
no such thing.
The IMCA modifieds. Okay, time out here. You have a sealed 604 from GM. Everybody's got the same engine, so to speak. Mm-hmm. Okay? What can you do to get more power out of that? Well, you're going to go to your fuel delivery system. You're going to go to your accessory drive. And you start talking the accessory drives on some of these cars are $3,000 because they're low-friction components. They're a serpentine belt system instead of a V-belt system. So there you're freeing up more horsepower to put to the ground. Then you start talking, okay, what are we going to – your fuel delivery system. Okay, we can go slap a Willys crate carb on there for $600. Mm-hmm. Or we can sit here and spend $1,300 or $1,400 or $1,500, get some Heizook Braswell or AED carburetor, slap it on there, and we've got 10 more extra horsepower than the next guy.
Which is what a lot of people are going to do.
Then you start saying, okay, now I'm going to add a spacer to that, and you've got all these trick spacers out there that are $200 a piece. Then, okay, well, that's not enough. You're going to keep going more and more and more. So you say, okay, I'm not putting that money into the engineering of the engine. I'm not putting that money into the engineering of the chassis. Okay, you're right. But you're putting your engineering money into all these components you're bolting on. Mm-hmm. You start talking low-friction components in a rear end. They're illegal in IMCA modifieds, but they're out there. Yeah. You start talking, Heizook brake pads. They're out there. You can go down to O'Reilly's and buy a